This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. I hope you're well. There's some strange stories around today. I'm not quite sure yet which ones we will discuss in depth together, but do feel free to keep your suggestions incoming. 84850. You can even tweet at Mr. James OB. In terms of the headlines that really sort of made my jaw drop, I think that the front of the queue is a report that 1 in 3 female surgeons has been assaulted by a colleague. Now, I have 2 things to say from the outset. The first is, I don't really like lazy stereotypes, but I do hear a lot over the years from you about some surgeons suffering from a sort of God complex. I mean, even to the point where an absence of empathy might make you a better surgeon. But I don't necessarily want to get stuck into the philosophy of that side of things. And I certainly don't want surgeons listening to the programme to feel unfairly targeted or pilloried. But I'm afraid if 1 in 3 female surgeons are reporting sexual assault by a colleague, then there's nothing unfair about the targeting. We'll just try and avoid the pillorying, while recognising throughout, of course, that shocking though this statistic is, it is by no means evidence that every male surgeon is a wrong-un. The other thought that occurred to me immediately upon seeing that headline was, crikey, if it's female surgeons who are being assaulted by a colleague, so equals, as it were, professional equals, one wonders quite what the situation is for juniors, for nurses and junior doctors who are working with surgeons minded to assault a colleague who is a professional equal. Would their attitude to perceived juniors or inferiors be even more obnoxious? 2/3 of women working in surgery report having been sexually harassed by a colleague in or around the operating theatre. In or around the operating theatre. It is apparently a misogynistic culture in hospitals that poses a significant threat to patient safety. This is all reported in today's British Journal of Surgery, and the Times have got hold of that ahead of publication. It's an arresting story that has echoes of the Me Too movement, the early days of the Me Too movement, which was, you will recall, confined to the entertainment industry. In its early days, it was confined to Hollywood, and this exposure of an absolutely endemic attitude of misogyny in the entertainment industry was simultaneously shocking and, when you thought about it, unsurprising, because phrases like casting couch had been in our popular vocabulary for years. I hope this doesn't make me sound silly. I don't think it does. I already nodded towards the notion of God complexes or similar among surgeons, that just the way that you are revered in a hospital means that it is possibly likely that your head will be turned, your own head will be turned by your seniority and by the reverence you command and the importance that you are imbued with. I am surprised, much more surprised than I was when the Harvey Weinstein story broke, and, well, it was like a dam being breached, wasn't it? And the flood of stories of appalling behaviour by men towards women in Hollywood and beyond engulfed us all. I am more surprised by this than I was by that. But I'm obviously not going to confine the question to what has happened to you. Again, for 2 reasons. The first, that I'm not sure there'll be enough people listening with personal, direct experience of being assaulted in a surgical setting. The second is, even if there are, you might not want to ring me. And the third is, I am, as ever, interested in the environment, the creation of the environment. The word I have to stop myself from using all the time is ecosystem, because I have been writing a lot about the creation of a political ecosystem in which ridiculous and appalling things could happen. It's the single most important question of the last 10 years in Britain, possibly the last 50. How could we have allowed an ecosystem to have been created by newspaper owners, so-called think tanks, conservative politicians, all the in which they absolutely insane things could happen right under our noses without us really realising or recognising how insane and absurd these things are. So ecosystem is my word of the week, word of the month, word of the year at the moment. And it kind of applies here. How can so many men end up so emboldened by their own importance that they engage in a kind of behaviour that in most other work context is these days, but obviously not always, absolutely anathema. So sexual misconduct is rife and appears to go unchecked in the profession. What I found during the early days of Me Too was an astonishing divide between men and women. And most shocking for me was the way in which women presumed that there was no point talking about it to all men, even men that were allies, if you like, or were sympathetic and were not in a million years ever going to be engaging in this sort of behaviour. Those men were as shocked as everybody else by the sheer normality of sexual harassment, the way in which pretty much every woman you know will have had at least one pretty hideous experience of being either sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. And it even sounds naive now, doesn't it? And I get guard now against adding things to the phrase like, as the father of daughters. No, I don't want to sound like Rishi Sunak, God forbid. But you do find yourself feeling a sense of shame, but an even more profound sense of shock at being not utterly unaware, but being so unaware of what was routinely unfolding in your own world, in your own milieu, really, in your own sort of social circle, in your own professional circle, finding out, for example, about some of the stuff that went on newspapers I worked on from women I worked with, truly took my breath away. That bit of it has always fascinated. It's not necessarily the topic for conversation today. I'm just throwing in some sort of personal perspectives on this, because if it's front page news, it means that it is going to be shocking to a lot of people. It's man bites dog territory. Front page news is man bites dog. But for the people in the story, this is dog bites man. That was what I learnt from Me Too. The way that we're really shocked by it, I use the word we loosely, and it's newsworthy, and it's an international phenomenon, and the hashtag Me Too, I think, was one of the most used of the year, and it changed everything, and men are in prison. Men have gone from being the most powerful producers in Hollywood to being prisoner number 43432. And yet, for the women in that world, for the actresses and the people who worked in film, it was the most ordinary story, the most unextraordinary story of their lives. It was like, oh yeah, right, yeah, he's a bit of a wrong 'un, is he? Oh well, colour me shocked. Do you see that? I mean, as a journalist, I find that distressing. It makes me almost distraught to think that you can have how many people dedicated to putting news into the public sphere, and we all sat there going, oh gosh, that's shocking. And all the women sat there going, yeah, all right, lads, better late than never. For flip's sake, what do you think these men were doing when... So is this like that for you? Are you as a nurse or a doctor or a surgeon, you're sitting there going, oh really, yeah, culture of misogyny in hospitals, oh whatever next, bears using woods for their toilet, Pope being a Catholic, what are we going to be looking at next? So I want, with your help, to try to get into that nexus if I can, both the reality of what is happening, but also the psychology of how something so commonplace, i.e. hospitals, i.e. the NHS, can be a place in which this kind of thing happens so routinely. That's the word I think works best. It's the routine nature of sexual misconduct. The study concludes sexual misconduct occurs frequently and appears to go unchecked in the surgical environment owing to a combination of, and here it comes, a deeply hierarchical structure and a gender and power imbalance. So it's coming up to 10:13. I need you to tell me 2 or 3 things. The first, obviously, what was your experience of this embedded misogyny, this deeply hierarchical structure, and this normalization of sexual misconduct, okay? If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. I promise I'll be sensitive. Obviously, I'll be sensitive. It's hideous territory. But I just want to know what it was like to discover, not just that man you work with was behaving in this way, but that the entire system was geared to protect him instead of you. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then I'd like to look at that deeply hierarchical structure and a gender and power imbalance. What happens? What is it? And this is surgeons, not just consultants. So it's not going to be just the most senior people, but the way that the hierarchy works in hospitals, something imbues these men with a sense of power and authority that is both abnormal and dangerous. And I'd like you to talk to me a little bit about that. How rigid is the hierarchy? How much can these surgeons get away with? What is it about the way the system is structured that essentially creates the culture or the ecosystem in which sexual misconduct can occur frequently and go unchecked in the surgical environment? Unchecked in the surgical environment. So it is Me Too, this, for the NHS. It's Me Too for surgical settings. And as with Me Too, I'm here today to sort of walk a weird tightrope between learning about stuff that will shock me and not fully understanding why it's only come out now. So those are your two questions, really. Tell me about stuff that will shock the rest of us, but is normal in your workplace, 0345 6060973, and tell me why you think or how you think a culture could have been inculcated in which the unacceptable has been appearing to be acceptable for so long. It's 10:15. Obviously, this is sensitive territory. I'll do my best to insert trigger warnings whenever necessary, but in the first instance I can't do much without your help on this, and much of the survey, of course, all of the survey would have been anonymous, but that line there I think is the one that best encapsulates it. I was just trying to think whether I know any surgeons. The only surgeon I know is female, and so I don't know that I've got anyone I could call on to give me a slightly better steer on this, except this line: sexual misconduct occurs frequently and appears to go unchecked in the surgical environment, owing to a combination of a deeply hierarchical structure and a gender and power imbalance. So what has that created, and how has that system been allowed to flourish? 0345 6060 973. It's 10:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It isn't just consultant male surgeons harassing and assaulting other female consultants, Lindsay in Manchester tells me. It's the trainee surgeons too, i.e. registrars and senior registrars. I worked as a medical rep in theatres across the country and across all surgical specialties. The male surgeons often displayed harassment to me as a visiting medical rep, and it seemed like there was no route to complain about it to the hospitals. So it's not surprising to me that women are being assaulted, because the physical proximity that they are often in at the operating table will make it more possible. God, I hadn't even thought about that, Lindsay. Oh, and the physical proximity is necessary depending on the operation being performed. But it's a power imbalance again, and a culture where consultants are given too much deference. Tell me about your experiences of that. So in the context of what the sexual assaults might entail, and this is where, or why I mentioned a moment ago that trigger warnings will be necessary, that's as if an operating, so you know when some perv in your office stands far too close to you behind the microwave or something like that, or behind the coffee machine, or when you're on the tube and you're pretty sure that what the bloke next to you is doing is not an accident, that's happening around an operating table. I'm sorry if I sound naive, but I'm beginning to realise some mornings that I just am. It's 20 minutes after 10. Let's start in Birmingham. Maria's there. Marie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, morning. For me, it just brought back some horrible memories, really.
I'm sorry.
And I realise I'm 44 now, and this happened to me. My first job, I was 17. I went to work for a medical practice.
Yeah.
I was 17, maybe a little bit naive, but you just
young, Marie, not naive.
Young, yeah. It was a husband and wife practice. A gentleman who was very well known in the community locally, doing lots of work, and he came across like a father, grandfather type of personality, and immediately you were just drawn to this gentleman. So it's just so respectful.
Right.
For me, it started very quickly. It was a few incidents where I was asked to come into the room and just take a seat, please. Take a seat. I need you to take these notes and pull these files up. And he would come from behind and then try and touch me, and it happened a few times. And
this was a GP's, was it, Marie, rather than a surgery?
No, it was a GP,
okay.
Yes. GP, it was a medical practice. And it was the first time it happened, I was just shocked. And you just think, what is this? What is this happening?
And what was that? Presumably, if I mean, this is different from what the research today is looking at, but I imagine the sort of entitlement and hierarchy relationship is similar. Presumably, there's no path to properly complain if the person doing this is also the boss, as it were.
Exactly. So the practice manager, the other staff that were there had been there for a long time. All. They spoke of him so highly. Who was going to believe me? I've just started. Yes. I've only been here 3 days.
Oh, God.
And then it was the first week, and then a couple of weeks later when he would always try and do it on an opportunity when I was just 2 people on staff,
right.
Like an evening shift or a very early shift or a weekend shift, because then it was more of an opportunity. For me, I tried to speak to my mom about it. But even then, it was like, oh, he's such a great guy, and he's
men will be men.
Job.
This is a very a generational thing, isn't it?
For me, what I found in my life is, and unfortunately, it didn't stop there for me. I mean, obviously, I stayed working there for 3 years, but right. I put things into place. I'm a bit of a fighter. I'm a little bit feisty. And I realised that I can try and safeguard myself because nobody is going to believe me. If my own mum was completely bought into this, he's a doctor, he's a great
is, I mean, it's a bit like priests, isn't it? You have that, so you have that position of seniority in society, and therefore, it's no consolation to you, but you're far from alone. I remember when we first started examining abuse in the church, in the Catholic and the Anglican communities, the number of parents who sided with the abuser because of their dog collar over their own children was, heartbreaking. And I can see a doctor being imbued with a similar sense. It's all sorts of social authority. Marie, I'm so sorry for what you went through. I really am. The third of female NHS surgeons would, of course, in some cases, not have had that power dynamic in quite the same way that you did as a very new and junior member of staff. And there are quite a few people with direct experience of what this research has shown. This was over 20 years ago, James, but when I was a student nurse on placement, it was rife. Examples being, we were told that we shouldn't make eye contact with certain surgeons as they were literally God. We were tolerated in theatre, but we had to know our place. Also, having a surgeon stand in front of me. At the time, I didn't know that my role was to tie up his surgical gown. I did this and was met with, I don't know if I can say this bit on the radio, nice and tight. I think I can, but it's not very nice. There's no rude words. Nice and tight, that's how I like my women, said the surgeon to this student nurse on placement. They also mocked women on the table who had not done their bikini line. It was endless, James. I would like to think that I would challenge it now, but it's their kingdom and you know your place. And that's from Ava. Thank you. 10:24 is the time. Sonia is in Leeds. Sonia, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I've been working in the NHS for a very long time, since 1998. And I have seen all kinds of behaviour. I work in theatres. But I can also say that I think it is getting better, though. But, I can tell you all kinds of stories where you go to your manager and you tell your manager, female and male, and
yes.
My one manager said to me, "What do you do to these men?" I said, "It's my fault."
Really?
And my female manager said to me, "Well, he likes you, so."
Good grief. So what intrigues me, and I'm glad to hear that you think things are improving, is that I hope this, God, I'm constantly worried about sounding naive at the moment, Sonia. It's a very strange place I found myself in. But lots of workplaces have had similar scenarios in place. But and that's why the hashtag #MeToo movement regarding the entertainment industry was so newsworthy. But I thought that the world had turned rather more than this research suggests it has. What is it about hospitals specifically, and possibly even surgery theatres, operating theatres in particular, that I don't want to say allows, because it shouldn't be allowed and it can be disallowed. But what do you think it is about those environments that creates this atmosphere of impunity for the surgeons?
So I think what happens is you get called out during the night, you get called out early in the morning. It's a very small pool of people. You see the same people all the time. You stay in on-call rooms. You are very vulnerable and you're an easy target. It's not like you are. It's not a lot of people. I mean, you're often walking around in the middle of the night on your own.
Right.
From theatre to theatre. It's a very small pool. And I found that's why. And also, some surgeons, they don't really mean it. And especially when I was younger, you think, oh, well, I know it's not going to mean it. I'm going to joke. I'm not going to take it further, but I don't want to complain, because then next time you work with them, he's going to take it out, and not take it out on you, but it's not going to be such an easy work environment. So you can either just carry on with it, keep it dumb, so not escalate it, or you can obviously come across as very naive and they take advantage of you.
Go on.
Or you can also take it further. I tried, but this was many years ago, though. This was before the Me Too movement. Where I am right now, it wouldn't be allowed.
Well, I mean, I'd hope you're right, but it is still happening. Lots of the testimony given to the research that we're looking at today is very, very, very recent. So some of it is stuff that would have happened in all workplaces, and some of it is specific to the health context, isn't it? Some of it is something to do with the seniority that a consultant enjoys, that a surgeon enjoys.
Yeah. But again, I think it's also got to do with where you are in that seniority. So if you are a registrar and you know that you are bound to the surgeon, and if you're not nice to the surgeon, they're not going to let you do operating cases, and it's actually going to hamper your advancement in your career. It's going to be different to someone who is either a consultant or not a surgeon. So it does matter where you are in that situation as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, it's not just your opinion, I don't think. I think it's fairly well supported by the testimony given to the survey here, which is anonymous, of course, but some female doctors have chosen to break their own anonymity, including a retired consultant, oncoplastic breast surgeon who retired in 2019 called Liz O'Riordan. And she says, it was usually in theatre when you're operating next to your boss, your superiors and your peers. You're wearing thin cotton scrubs and you have full body contact. So that's the proximity. So you're all leaning over the same body. But it's what happens next that is the appalling behaviour. You have full body contact. It was knuckle brushes on your breasts, touching your bum, comments about your sex life, lewd suggestions to make you blush. And when it happens, no one else in the theatre responds. And she reports she didn't feel comfortable speaking about her experience until she'd stopped working as a surgeon. There was one occasion when I did say something and I had a very uncomfortable meeting with a boss and someone from HR. I had to work with that man for the next few months and I backtracked. There is a fear of speaking out when your job depends on the training and references from the person harassing you. That's what Sonia was just referring to. That's the bit that I think best highlights what I was trying to describe as normal for people in the story and utterly abnormal or comprehensible to people in the story and utterly incomprehensible to the rest of us. The nature of the job, the nature of this physical proximity, coupled with this almost military hierarchy, the idea that these, and I know it's not just consultant surgeons who will be responsible for this, but consultant surgeons are like generals or field marshals who can do more or less whatever they want. And when you marry those two together, the door is open for appalling behaviour, but only, I think, because the men are already appalling? No? Or does the environment contribute to the behaviour, or does it contribute to the behaviour, or merely allow it? The number you need on this, and I know it's tough, but thank you. It's very illuminating so far. 0345 6060 973. So I suppose at its loosest, at its simplest, I'm asking both what happens or what happened to you, but also how is it permitted to happen? How is it permitted to continue? It's 10:30. Thomas Watts is here now with
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 26 minutes to 11, and I'm really in that zone. I don't know about you, of being simultaneously shocked and unsurprised. The more you explain to me how this happens, the less surprising it is that it does happen, but it never ceases to be shocking. This is very striking from Amy, who writes, my ex-partner is a consultant surgeon. I'd wanted to disagree with this God complex scenario, but it does exist. The hierarchy encourages bullying at all levels and sexual harassment with incentives to perform non-necessary surgery. Taking groups of female physios on holiday when they feel they can't say no. The fact that my ex-partner was my surgeon and then initiated a relationship with me just shows how much they feel they can get away with, or how much he felt he could get away with. I know we're talking about a systemic problem, but I am conscious of not tarring everybody with the same brush. It was only some time after it ended, James, that I realised the inappropriateness of the abuse of power. Hi, James. I'm a female consultant. This is from Trish, who's in North London, in the NHS. Since my medical school years in 2006, I've seen all sorts of inappropriate behaviour. From a GP who used to comment on female breast size on chest x-rays to surgeons who would insist on specific junior doctors because they fancied them to assist them in theatre, even if they were busy on another shift. One surgeon wouldn't let female students attend his clinics or his rounds unless they were wearing skirts or dresses. Remember, Trish was at medical school in 2006, not 1906. It's ridiculous, she says. I know a number of male surgeons, and the old boy culture among many of them is rife. It is improving for sure, but of all the specialities I've rotated through, surgeons, particularly orthopaedic surgeons, Trish tells us, are the worst. It is, truly, truly shocking. I'm a nurse working in the NHS and have seen numerous times misogynistic behaviour from consultants. One episode sticks out and was a reason why I left a particular trust. There was a certain consultant in one hospital where I worked known for his dislike of women and nurses. When approaching him, people would give you a word of warning about him being renowned for disliking women and nurses. He was embarrassed me in front of other medical staff whenever I approached him about patients, and when I escalated, I was often told that's just the way he is. When I went to HR about this man, I was told that they'd had a word with him and he was going to take me for a cup of coffee if I wanted, in order to make me feel better. Of course, I ended up leaving because his behaviour continued to be unbearable and unsafe. 10:37 is the time. Andy is in Birmingham. Andy, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. This report is absolutely no surprise. It won't be any surprise to anyone. I've worked in the NHS for 37 years now. I'm a senior manager. I was a nurse many years ago. My daughter's a nurse. She works in the surgical team in a large teaching hospital and talks to me about this kind of thing all the time. And it's interesting. If you take a bunch of men from a narrow social strata, mostly middle class, yes, quite a lot ex-public school, you shower them with adulation, you put them on the highest pedestal society has, you pay them very well. Most consultant surgeons have been working for a few years, are quite wealthy. Yes. That gives you an enormous amount of power. You add to that the absolute godlike control over people's careers that these people have,
and patients' lives.
No, absolutely, yeah. And if you, and it's also to do with power and status as well. It's sexual harassment is something which travels down; it doesn't travel up.
Yes.
My daughter works with a team of surgeons who are all fantastic. She's got a terrific relationship with them. There are female surgeons. Successful female surgeons don't get the kind of sexual harassment that junior medics do.
Right.
And
because of the power dynamic. Because of the
power dynamic. Toxic masculinity is. It's really interesting because we like to think it's exclusive to the Andrew Tate worshipping knuckle draggers, but it's not. Toxic masculinity goes right through all levels of society, and I think it's particularly strong in in medicine, particularly in surgery, which is it's not exclusively, but is very heavily weighed towards middle-class white men.
Right.
And that absolutely has and they carry an awful lot of power in the system.
Just to clarify, when you mention middle-class white men, it's because we are, and because I'm one of them, although I'm not a surgeon, obviously. We are a constituency that already enjoys considerable privilege, which often goes unchecked and unchallenged, and we often don't even know that we're enjoying considerable privilege. So it's not an ethnic observation, but it is a socio-economic one, and it is another example of people's behaviour being defined, if you like, or determined by this sense of impunity stroke superiority.
Yeah, and entitlement. It's okay to make like for example, my daughter works in a plastic surgery related specialty. I don't want to embarrass her. She's always petrified I'm going to say something on Twitter about where she works. And a doctor made comments about the size of her breasts. And would you consider having some kind of and she is incredibly feisty. She takes no crap from anybody and is a real advocate and is always getting herself into trouble, kind of challenging things and sticking up for patients or whatever. And she was absolutely lost for words. And I think it's that kind of the lady who was on before when she said she took it to a manager and they said, well, what did you do? I think there's a sense of victim blaming that often goes on, and that people do feel disempowered, and you're essentially taking on the top people in the system, and that takes an awful lot of courage. And people, you turn around who's behind you, backing you up, and you turn around and there's nobody there. And that's really hard.
I know that the offences are gravely different, but we saw how hard it is to blow a whistle, even if you're worried that a nurse is killing babies, and you're senior in a hospital hierarchy. So the idea of blowing whistles on sexual assault from a very junior position is going to be even harder. What about you when you were working? Did you have to bite your tongue?
I mean, I don't know. I was lucky enough to work in a team that really looked after each other, and have always had really supportive managers. And if there was ever anything that we weren't, I was working in clinical areas back in the early 90s, a long time ago, and I think probably things would happen then that you'd hopefully you wouldn't see happening here. But it was always felt like it was incredibly hierarchical. There were some people who couldn't really be questioned about what they did, and it was, and as you say, you go for a coffee, or you. It's quite often, senior medics would take people out and they'd pay for all the drinks and all the rest of it. And going out and paying for people's drinks and getting people drunk is a whole other thing as well. And that's something that my daughter's already spoken about to me in the past.
So there's crossover. I mean, a lot of people in a lot of other sectors will be recognising some of what you say. Certainly Fleet Street newspapers, when I arrived there 25, 30 years ago, would have experienced some of the things that you've described, but there is something specific to health environments in the same way that the original Me Too movement was specific to. It's the amount of power and influence that these individuals wield that almost boils their brains. If they were working in different contexts, some of them perhaps would be as shocked as you are by the behaviour that they consider to be commonplace. And you can see in some of the testimony given, in some of the case studies published in the Times today, you can see the sort of almost the progress, the evolution of behaviour from being creepy and inappropriate to being criminal. I didn't make a fuss because we were about to go into theatre, and I don't think I'd properly registered what had happened. One consultant plastic surgeon told the Times about a man, a colleague, discussing a patient with a male colleague. He made some noises, rubbed himself against me, and then as he backed away, he said, "You could probably feel my erection then." And he told me he could see down my top. So in his mind, he probably thinks he's flirting. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, if you get away with that, it's like you make a comment about somebody's appearance, and the kind of, I'm not talking about you look nice. Yeah, that's a nice dress. That's a nice pair of shoes or whatever. It's something a bit more personal.
Something about the body.
Yeah, exactly. Or then there's a bit of touching, or there's a bit of suggestive kind of talk about
your sex life, your past. Yes.
And then nobody's stopping you. Nobody's challenging you.
Who would though?
What are you going to do?
What would you have to be?
Yeah, exactly.
Who would you have to be to stop it? Because you would almost, by definition, be junior to the person doing it, which puts things in a fairly tricky situation, doesn't it? In all hierarchies.
No, absolutely. I mean, most NHS organisations now have confidential lines. They have speaker officers who you could contact entirely confidentially to talk about what's going on. I'm incredibly attached to the organisation that I've worked for my entire life, and I think we do have very good human resources.
And it's only getting better. And I balk slightly at stories that involve coming on air at 10 o'clock in the morning and having a swing at the NHS for the reasons that you will understand more than anyone. But sometimes you have to. This is a Me Too moment, if you like, for those working in surgery. And fair play to the Times and their ongoing health commission for looking into this and for blowing the lid off it. Andy, thank you. I'm cracking on only because it's time for this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Christine in Rainford, you've managed to put into words something I struggle to do, and I'm grateful to you for doing so. I'm listening to your programme, James, and I've been taken back to the 1970s when groping and sexual assault was seen as a rite of passage in the workplace. I daren't have told my parents what happened to me in my late teens as my place of work, as my dad would have likely got involved, and I didn't want him being prosecuted for assaulting the perpetrator. So I found the balls to stand up for myself, she's put that in quotes understandably, and threatened to report them. I also did my best to avoid any situations where I would be vulnerable. It's unbelievable that men, and professional men in a position of trust, still behave like that. The 70s and the 80s do feel like a different universe. So just think about the calendars that would be on the wall in an office where women were working. Just little things like that, which nobody thought were, well, I can't say no one thought that was bad because I wasn't there. And I didn't get to it. I presume some people did find it appalling, and that's why it doesn't go on anymore. But that there is, I'm with Christine completely on that, the threads that run through generations and the way that this sort of behaviour is recognised as unacceptable in some areas, while it still continues in others. And that's where my fascination comes from, in the what it is about the hierarchy and the phrase that they use in the report, which I think puts it best, this notion of the combination of hierarchy and structure. Facilitating is the word that I want. Facilitating this appalling conduct. It's 10 minutes to 11. Louis in Bristol. Louis, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Yeah, I wanted to call because so I'm an NHS consultant, and about 10 or 11 years ago when I was a junior doctor, I was kind of repeatedly and persistently sexually harassed and groped by one of the male consultants I worked with over about a 12-month period.
Right.
And earlier on in the show you talked about, or you discussed how that type of thing can be allowed to happen, and I just wanted to, if I could, shed a bit of light on where I was working at the time.
Yeah, that would be helpful. If I don't know what you're doing at the moment, but the phone line is awful. It's very, very windy, so I don't know if you can take shelter or something like that.
I will take shelter. Yeah. So,
thank you.
I won't name any names or any places, but
Sure.
Essentially where I was working on the first day that I started this job, the senior nurse on the ward that I was assigned to eyed me up and down, and she said, and I'll never forget this, she said, "Oh, he's going to like you."
Oh, Lord.
And a couple of the nurses kind of laughed, and then this was just before the morning ward round, and they said, "Oh, okay, well, what we'll do is we'll make sure one of us is between you and him at all times."
Gosh.
And I thought this was a hazing ritual, or it was some kind of joke.
Yes.
And what subsequently happened was, over the course of the year, and this consultant got as close to me as he possibly could, spent as much of his free time touching my chest, my abdomen, my groin. He had his arms around me. He would massage me while I was trying to write discharge letters and paperwork. And the entire hospital knew about it. Every ward I went to, every nurse, every doctor, every porter I spoke to knew me to be the one that he liked that year, and that
Right.
every year there was one that he had his eye on.
Yeah.
And I later learned that about 10 years prior to my working there, he'd been suspended for similar behaviour and was allowed back kind of on a phased return. And the nurses were telling me that slowly but surely the old behaviours just kind of came back into it. But the hospital wouldn't and couldn't fire him.
Why not?
Because, well, he was too senior and he was too valuable to them. He was.
I understand.
He kind of he spearheaded a lot of investment into the hospital and expansion of some of the services, and he was very heavily involved in medical education and mentoring the junior doctors. And there wasn't anyone where this hospital was in the country, kind of chronically understaffed, not the most popular place in the world to work, and they would have really struggled to find someone to take on the role that he had.
And there was nowhere you could turn either, I presume, in this sort of scenario.
No. The thing, I didn't really know, and because it took me quite a while to realise that this was more than just a joke that the nurses were playing on me, that this was... This was legitimately inappropriate behaviour. And look, I don't want to, I've read some of the reports from this morning, and I don't want to steer the conversation away from the more traumatic and aggressive behaviours that have been documented, because certainly my experience was nowhere near as...
No, but you're describing impunity and entitlement, and an environment in which there is no real recourse to complaint.
No, there was. The only way it ended up coming about was every year... within each trust in the NHS, there are anonymous surveys carried out to assess the quality of teaching and training and supervision that junior doctors are getting. And there's a section on bullying and harassment in that. Okay. And anonymously, one of my colleagues, unbeknownst to me, wrote a paragraph about me being harassed throughout the year. And that flagged it up to the hospital senior management.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that of course means that if in the future, if something happens, then there is actually a paper trail that would demonstrate a failure to intervene and a failure to act, isn't there? That's part of the reason why this exists. And of course, it's precisely the sort of thing people sometimes complain about for being red tape or bureaucracy or infantilizing doctors, but it's desperately important when you see it in the context you describe.
Yeah.
And did it work? I mean, was action taken?
So then, coincidentally, at the time, the trust I was working in was being taken over by another trust, and part of that takeover, there was a lot of staffing issues and waiting list issues that they were all trying to sort out as part of the deal. And this comment threatened to derail the entire process. Oh. So the incoming management of the trust that was trying to take us over sat all the junior doctors down and said, look, this comment's been made, and it's, you can't make it anonymously. Or either someone needs to back this up with hard evidence, or you need to withdraw it.
Whoa, and it was, that's not ideal, is it?
Yeah. Well, they said you can't make anonymous accusations like that.
Okay. So what happened?
So then I subsequently got in touch with the management, and we had a meeting, and I went through some of the instances. And they told me that they were aware of this already, that they'd been mounting an investigation for the previous 2 years.
Right, God.
And this was just kind of more ammunition, which 2 or 3 years down the line, I later learned they approached him with these accusations, asked him to step down, and then rehired him on a locum contract. Yeah, because, as I said earlier, there was no one to fill his boots.
So they think they've covered their back, but they've done absolutely nothing to properly address the problem. I'm sorry that you went through that, and I understand why you were keen to sort of almost put some distance between yourself and some of the stuff that we've been reading about this morning, but there were definitely elements of intersection, and in some ways highlighted from a different perspective, puts new light on them. 10:56 is the time. Judith is on the line. Judith, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I was really impressed by your previous speaker, the chap who's an NHS manager, who,
yes, Andy,
as far as I'm aware, really hit the nail on the head about this being a power issue.
Yes.
Obviously, just to kind of declare my conflict, I spoke to the BBC about this. I'm already quoted, so I'm already comfortable speaking out.
Okay.
But what I think is, there's a small subset of people who are doing this for sexual kicks, and that, abhorrent. But there is a much larger group who I think, the culture and the language in surgery is still quite an old boys club. it is getting better, but that idea of, women aren't really welcome there.
Yeah.
And this behaviour being allowed and normalised just as another way of putting female surgeons in their place, or aspiring female surgeons in their place. And it contributes, I think, to the loss of talent that you get in women. There's a much larger proportion of female surgical trainees compared to consultants.
The dropout rates are shocking, aren't they?
Absolutely.
What was your role? Do you mind me asking? What did you tell the BBC?
So the incident that I spoke about earlier was when I was, very junior in training, and the reason I felt comfortable talking about it was a very public incident, and I think it just highlighted the culture problem. So I was a junior surgeon in theatre, huge team around me, and a different consultant surgeon, so not my team, was in the operation. And, I guess he started to get a bit sweaty. He just turned around and he stuck his head right in my cleavage. And wiped his sweaty brow on me. And you just freeze, right? You just think, what just happened? So I stopped and I paused, and then a few minutes later he did it again. And at this point I found my voice a bit, and I said, excuse me, do you want a towel? Yeah. I'm going to draw attention to this. And he said, no, this is much more fun. And it was a laugh and a smirk, and it was the fact that no one else in theatre said anything. I was the person with the least power in the room, and this was normal and okay and acceptable, and and no one afterwards followed up with me and said, God, he was a bit creepy, wasn't he? Or that was really inappropriate. It was the fact that 10 people in the room all thought this was normal, so I must be the outlier.
Well, they were used to it, Judith, weren't they?
Well, exactly, and and I think what's really telling is the response to these stories today is that no woman is surprised by this.
No, I
know. Not at all.
I know.
And thankfully,
And men surprised sound ridiculous a bit, I think, because how could you not be more aware of some of the stuff, especially when you describe things that men have witnessed and yet still be clutching their pearls about this morning?
But I think because it's so meaningless to them, they don't remember it, right? They've witnessed it, they've forgotten about it straight away, whereas it stays with us. Yeah. And I felt that I was able to talk about my experience because it was, on the scale of things, relatively minor, but public. So, I know a lot of people have experienced far, far worse. And without a serious culture change, that's only going to continue.
And this hopefully has to be part of the process of bringing that serious culture change about. Did you stay in surgery? Did you stay in?
Yeah, I'm a consultant surgeon now.
Sorry, yes.
So that's why, that now the power is different. And obviously I'm much older. I'm not the target of this kind of behaviour from colleagues in the same way, but you still hear the inappropriate comments.
Do you say stuff? Do you always pick up on it, or do you let some of it slide, if you don't mind me asking?
I do pick up on it because I feel like it's my position to.
Yes.
But as a result, you do get othered somewhat. You're fun. You're not part of the joke.
Yeah.
There's and also the people I think will stop saying it in front of you. So I don't think it stopped happening. True. I just think people don't say it in front of you.
Thank you for that. I did incredibly helpful, but quite dispiriting, really. That the only glimmer of hope was 2 glimmers of hope to take away, isn't there? Judith wasn't the only woman to say that things are getting better. And, of course, the notion of systemic change taking place, and a necessary, absolutely essential precursor of systemic change is light getting into the dark places, is the exposure of these sort of stories. And without women finding that, is courage the right word? I'm not even sure. I think it is, but it takes some sort of it takes something to come forward when others don't feel that they're ready to, or others can't. Without the courage of women coming forward like that, you're not going to get the light shone into these dark places. And light, of course, is it cleans. It's 1 minute after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. Okay, this one's weird, and I can't quite believe the reason for my change. I think when I explain it to you, it will make perfect sense. All right, I think it will, unless you're part of the problem, in which case it may still make perfect sense, but you're going to have to work quite hard to pretend that it doesn't. So Mark Rowley was giving a speech yesterday at one of those infernal think tanks. And the location of the speech in this occasion is not important because he could have said it anywhere. He predicted that facial recognition technology was going to be as significant as DNA in transforming criminal investigations, okay? And I don't know whether you'll find this surprising. I'm always conscious of how much the audience has grown over the last few years. And so this weird 7-year period we've had since Brexit, when the show has been largely defined by, well, being right about everything, that is misleading, because we weren't right about everything prior to 2016. Far from it. I had loads of opinions that I've subsequently changed, and some of them are still under review. But I'm always conscious of, as we return to topics that were very common and prevalent in the period of relative normality, certainly prior to 2010. I've been doing this job a very long time. Prior to 2010, certainly prior to 2008, then things were really normal. You know, I kind of, prior to the global financial crisis, that we were living in a period of unprecedented stability. It wasn't perfect. There was terrible inequality, but the direction of traffic was largely progressive, and the forces of self-sabotage were in abeyance, and forces of self-sabotage generally include all the sort of usual prejudices and bigotries. You persuade people to blame vulnerable people for their problems instead of powerful people, and you exacerbate all of those problems for both the individuals concerned and the society at large. But I think you'd be surprised to learn, if you're kind enough to pay attention to my burblings every day, that I used to be quite a nothing to hide, nothing to fear merchant. I used to be quite a kind of, I don't know what the correct word would be, to sort of, I wasn't that cognizant of looking after people who were falling foul of the government, right? So my view was, even, and remember that we cut our teeth during the period of unprecedented Islamist terrorism. I'm too young to really have been professionally engaged with Irish Republican terrorism, but Islamist terrorism, well, it worked, didn't it? We were terrorised, even though, particularly after the July the 7th attacks on London, we picked ourselves up, we dusted ourselves down, and we came back to work the next morning and got on with it. Something shifted. It was the anniversary, of course, of the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center yesterday. And, well, you speak to any Muslim and they'll tell you their whole world changed that day. Everybody's world changed, but nobody's world's changed more, apart from families bereaved or directly affected by the tragedy, that your average, utterly ordinary Muslim, their life has never been the same since. So the terrorism tragically works. And I think partly as a consequence of that, partly of worrying about there being threats around every corner, I developed quite a robust attitude to surveillance. I found my trust, the idea that it was a choice between terrorist and authority, seemed pretty irresistible to me. And if it's a choice between terrorist and authority, then every honest citizen chooses authority. I still think that the Jean Charles de Menezes story doesn't carry the weight across the broader political and media landscape that it should have done. And an entirely innocent man was shot dead on the London Underground precisely because of the attitude I've just described. I mean, there were operational errors, but the idea of better safe than sorry, plus if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, created an environment in which someone who'd done absolutely nothing wrong, except to, display fear of men running around with guns, or even just a flicker of fear. That really was a game-changing moment. But I was paying attention, but not necessarily to the right things. The reason I mention all of this is oddly linked to the political chaos that followed. I don't think this applies to the UK, but again, you might think I'm being criminally naive. But when you think you live in a progressive liberal democracy, right? Where sometimes votes go against you, sometimes votes go with you, but generally speaking, everybody agrees about the rules on the pitch upon which we play, right? But then Donald Trump can get elected. And there is no longer any agreement whatsoever about the rules on the pitch on which you play. Here's a vote, here's a result. Nope, not accepting it. Going to lie about it. Going to pretend that it does the polar opposite of what the numbers actually tell us that it does. And I will take a significant swathe of the Republican vote with me. Things like that change everything, right? They change absolutely everything, because there's a complacency to growing up in stable periods, and the complacency gives a free pass to authority. I spent most of my adult life thinking, the government does things wrong, but they're never going to do really terrible things. You could possibly bring the Julian Assange case in at this point, although it's a little bit more complicated and nuanced than the John Charles de Menezes one. But you just recognise, I didn't recognise until I was practically in my 50s, that the government isn't always your friend at some fundamental level. You know, austerity, disgusting, but the government still wouldn't lock up innocent people for political reasons, right? Lots of things that governments have done in my lifetime I've disapproved of, but I would never believe that they could be like a kind of, a Pinochet regime or actually oppressive. And I still don't in this country. I think there was a brief flirtation with some of these issues, authoritarianism in particular, but I still don't believe it could happen in this country. I still believe our checks and balances are robust enough to resist it, but it's happened in America. So you look at Donald Trump and you tell me that he wouldn't use anything at all to get his opponents, his political opponents, whether they were in the Democrat Party or the Republican Party, whether they were in the judiciary, the military, or the police. What would he use anything within his powers to hurt his opponents? Answer: yes. I mean, he campaigned on locking up Hillary Clinton for entirely unspecified non-criminal acts. Lock her up so you can cut. That's like the fascistic nature of authoritarianism. And that's why I now have a slightly different attitude to, or possibly even a very different attitude to, facial recognition technology. Mark Rowley yesterday talked about officers using the technology to identify unknown suspects, saying that the results had gone beyond what he expected. I think he was referring to the capture of the fugitive terror suspect Daniel Khalif, when he said, "We've also shown recently that live facial recognition is massively effective at picking out wanted offenders from crowds of people." I don't fully understand what he means by unknown suspects, using the technology to identify unknown suspects. But I know that he described the next step as retroactively using facial recognition to identify unknown suspects from CCTV images, and that this is showing immense potential. The results are beyond what I expected and are going to transform investigative work, potentially in the way that DNA transformed investigative work 30 years ago. Now that makes you relax, right? What's wrong with DNA? DNA has solved crimes that were 30 years old. DNA has seen innocent men released from prison after the true culprit has been identified. DNA is absolutely exact science. You leave your DNA somewhere, then there's not really any other way that it could have got there. There's some wiggle room there. I've seen CSI. But you know what I mean? No one really thinks that DNA has been a hindrance or a setback to criminal justice. So he brings DNA into it and we think, yeah, that's good. Live facial recognition uses cameras to scan faces in a specific area and then streams images to a database for people the police are looking for. Retrospective facial recognition will help officers to establish who a suspect is after a crime and see whether their images match up with images on other media or databases. Now, Liberty, the campaign group, warned that this is dystopian technology that could mean intrusive surveillance for protesters or those caught on CCTV. And there it is, right there, the thing that worries me most. So the Donald Trump thing sounds a bit excitable, right? Calm down, James. This is not. You have Ian Duncan Smith the other day essentially saying it's all right to smash up ULEZ cameras. So the idea that you can have people in positions of authority who are going to decide what is and what is not criminal damage is not some dystopian dream of the future. It's literally come out of Ian Duncan Smith's gob in the last fortnight. So what if you're protesting, for example, to save the planet? This facial recognition technology seems to me to be a mildly terrifying prospect. And I want to stress my credentials as someone who 20 years ago would have been all for it. 10 years ago, I was fairly comfortable with the government going through your emails because they might, as long as they were looking for evidence of terrorist plotting. The evidence of terrorist plotting sort of boiled my brains a bit. I don't know why. I think it was because I was doing it on air so much, and there were so many plots being unearthed and so many atrocities being enacted that you just sort of thought, well, you've got to give them any powers at all. And in fact, even now, if I say to you, why don't you want the police to have the powers to go after terror suspects? And you sort of say, well, because the powers would also apply to people who aren't terrorists. There's still a little bit of me that goes, oh, don't be soft. You can't be worrying about human rights when you're talking about, and I know that how silly that is, but I also know how seductive it is. So you probably know, listening to this, you probably already know more about facial recognition technology than I do. I would love to feel more relaxed about it by 12 o'clock today. I really would. I don't want to be necessarily living in a country where I'm worried that the government is going to use futuristic technology in order to turn the population into a herd of sheep and or lemmings. But I also recognise that in the context of a government now, and it's not as bad as Donald Trump, but we do have people like Suella Braverman and in government, and Priti Patel recently in government, people who seem to me to be quite sinister when it comes to public freedom. And we do have absolute fools, stroke weapons, in government who, frankly, I wouldn't trust to run a bath, let alone to run proper scrutiny of oppressive surveillance techniques. I genuinely think if you look at what they're trying to do to public protest, trying to render peaceful protest criminal, and then throw in facial recognition technology, so even if you manage to do it and, quotes, get away, end quotes, they'll come after you next week. They'll track you down using technology. So you would not only be criminalised for a peaceful protest, if the Home Secretary decides she doesn't like the thing you're protesting about. No sanction from the Home Office, I don't think, for Ian Duncan Smith essentially encouraging criminal damage. Then this kind of facial recognition technology seems to me to be quite scary. There, I've said it. And I stress again that 10 years ago, I'm pretty sure I'd have been all for it. So, forgive me for the unsophisticated inquiry at this point. How scared are you? 0345 6060 973. How scary is facial recognition technology? And remember that I'm quite keen for you to tell me that it's not scary at all, because I might do this for a living, but I am just a big pudding, really, and I don't really want to be frightened or concerned about. Not frightened, that's the wrong word. I'm concerned. I think if push came to shove, she's one of those areas which I would get stuck into. You're going to criminalise peaceful protest, and you're also going to, and just look at who's in charge, even if you think you like them, just imagine that they take against something you care about, like, I don't know, people waving European Union flags at the Royal Albert Hall. What really reassures you that you can trust the government with these ever more intrusive and invasive and effective technologies? Okay? Because if you draw a parallel with the DNA, Jason points out the equivalent of this would be a DNA database which had everybody's DNA on it. And then if there was any DNA at a crime scene, you run it through the database, and I mean, you can see the attraction of this idea, but if you haven't been convicted of any crime, you're allowed to demand that your DNA be removed from the database. I think, the phone lines are open, by the way, on this, 0345 6060 973. I think that this is about turning our society into a place where you're guilty until you can prove yourself innocent. And I would love, at risk of sounding like Kevin Keegan, I would love to be wrong. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. What do you make of facial recognition technology? And is it possibly going to be one of those things that we wave through and only realise later that we probably should have been paying rather more attention? 20 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need is 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 11. Oh, James, writes Leslie, I feel exactly the same as you. When I heard the man talking on the radio earlier saying we had nothing to fear, I realised that a few years ago I would have completely believed him. Now I just think, yeah, right. I don't believe a single word anyone in authority says. What a sad state of affairs. Indeed it is. And, of course, what we're talking about in the context of facial recognition technology is an absolutely classic example of okay, I trust this government with it, but once it's on the statute book, you're actually trusting every conceivable government with it. And quite conceivably, you, like me, you wouldn't trust this particular government to run a bath. Mark's in Milton Keynes. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I was listening to your comments, James. Good morning, by the way. And your future might be even more scary than you're thinking about. Because if you take, I mean, if you think about the facial recognition technology and the way that computers work, and you layer that information with the triangulation of mobile phones, and you layer that with your banking transactions and your credit card transactions, and then systems that record your loyalty when you go into a store, arguably we're heading to a future where we won't have any privacy at all.
I understand that, but there's a difference, isn't there, between protecting myself, protecting my right to protest against the government, and protecting my right to buy sausages without somebody keeping a record of it.
Yes, but the sinister aspect of it is whether you like it or not. If some government we don't like is in power and they decide they want to understand, give me a likelihood of all the people that attended this meeting that was going to protest against, something to do with climate change.
That's it. That's exactly what I'm thinking.
Your information is available.
Yes.
And there's pretty much little you can do about it. You'd have to be very, very diligent to opt out.
Well, what would you have to do? You'd have to walk around in a Groucho Marx mask. Well, no, you couldn't do that because they'd find you. You'd have to change your mask every day.
Well, they probably know where you bought the mask. That's the trouble. No,
I think this is a worry, and you're right. But we're constantly covering stories where big tech is refusing to cooperate with the authorities, and the idea that they can just phone up Sainsbury's and ask for every bit of evidence of everything you've ever done when you haven't actually done anything wrong. That is a long way off. But I don't think I'm as confident as I would have been once that it's never going to happen.
You would hope so, but the way technology evolves, it's rapid. I mean, if you think of, there's a thing called Moore's law in technology, where every 18 months power doubles and price halves. Yeah, and that's been absolutely consistent since the 50s. But
put it into a neatly encapsulated form then, with specific reference to facial technology, without necessarily having to bring any or facial recognition technology into any other. Bringing anything else into it, what is the scenario that you would use to chill people listening to this now to their very core? That's what we're looking for. I haven't come up with it, so I'm challenging you to do so.
Well, there's also the prospect of criminality and deepfake technology.
No, it's not. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Here is the facial recognition technology. We are all under a form of surveillance. What is the most chilling scenario that we can conjure up together that would, someone listening to this think, oh, get over it. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, that would stop them in their tracks?
It's a very good question.
It is, isn't it? And I know there's an answer. I can't. No, I haven't either. But there must be one, and someone listening will have it. So, what exactly should I be concerned about in this context? Because, Jason points out you've got universal DNA database plus routine facial recognition software everywhere, plus the universal sharing of location information, which is what you pointed out. And then, if you do nothing wrong, you've got nothing to fear. It becomes an evolution. But what is the thing I'm doing that I should be fearful about not being able to do anymore, almost?
Maybe just guilty by implication of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
They'd have to prove that I'd done something wrong when I was there, wouldn't they? Or would you well, hang on a minute, what's the chop? Charlotte Lynch got arrested just for covering a protest, didn't she? And that was before we had facial recognition technology. That's the challenge, Mark, that you have helped me to finesse the thing that you could use to really spook somebody into seeing the potential pitfalls or what it is that could happen. I'm slightly wary of senior police officers getting really excited about things they can do to innocent people in pursuit of guilty people, which is how this Mark Rowley intervention reads to me. I need a little bit more help fully understanding what retrospective facial recognition would do. But what I really want, the holy grail, I think, this hour, is what is the thing a government could do or a police service could do to me that facial recognition technology allows, and that would make me therefore frightened of facial recognition technology or concerned about it. Stuart's in Westminster. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of in favour of the facial recognition, but I believe, as yourself, that this government and possibly future governments can't be trusted, and the proper checks and balances need to be in place before it comes into power.
Well, who's going to do them? They're trying to they're calling to sack civil servants now because they told their colleagues that they voted to remain in the European Union, but we've really, really got to work hard to deliver on what voters voted for. I mean, the right-wing media, mate, is at the front of the queue of the organisations that should be providing checks and balances, and they're just rolling over and waiting to have their tummies tickled.
But that is my very point. I don't know who would be able to put the checks and balances in place. Cause
we could do it, Stuart, you and me.
I doubt it.
Well, I'll do the afternoons. You cover the mornings.
Yeah, fair enough. But there is the phrase that total power corrupts totally.
Yes.
And that's an old saying, and it's true, unfortunately. It is very true, but
what is the thing, though? I like this question. It's probably a bit simplistic, but what is the thing that would focus even the most sceptical listener upon the threat or the danger posed by facial recognition technology?
I don't know for sure.
Well, then we've got to chill a bit.
Yeah, the thing is, though, with facial recognition, they could track you back from your entire day. And admittedly, everybody breaks the law sometimes during the day, either touching your phone in the car or crossing the road where you're not supposed to.
I don't think that's illegal. That's only illegal in America, but I'm being pedantic.
No, there are certain spots you're not allowed to do it.
Okay.
In the UK, where there's pedestrian barriers on the road, you're not supposed to cross there.
Yeah. For
safety reasons. But if the government really, really wanted to, they could track you back and go, oh, he did that there, or he touched his phone there.
Yeah.
And it's a downward spiral. So I am in favour of it, but there has to be certain checks and balances. But the thing is, who's going to put the checks and balances in place?
Who's going to put them in? I take your point, and it's one of the things I've been writing about. The idea of the fourth estate holding power to account has been completely turned upside down in the last 10 years. Thank you, Stuart. It's just gone 11:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 11 is the time. The social credit system in China is something that we should probably be more aware of, and it's the perfect example of the thing that you sort of consider, well, we're never going to be like that, so then therefore we don't need to worry about the technology that allows the social credit system in China to be evolving. But how do you know? How do you know that future government... Look, if Boris Johnson can get into Downing... If Liz Truss can get into Downing Street, anything can happen in this country. Nadine Dorries, Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. Brexit, you're persuading the population to vote for that. Anything could happen in this country democratically. That's not the lesson of the last 10 years, and I don't know what is. But I mean, it is like, imagine what we've got now with credit checks and the rest of it. Imagine that times 1 million. And the government essentially using all of that information to take a judgment on whether you are a beneficial, a good member of society or not. I mean, it's pretty chilling. It is truly Orwellian, stroke dystopian, or whatever phrase you use in that context. And that perhaps is a beginning of an answer to the question of what exactly are we supposed to be worried about? Because I'm increasingly concerned that we should be worried, but I haven't got the flesh on the bones yet. 25 to 12 is the time. Harry is in Hertford. Harry, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Long time listener, this first time caller.
Welcome.
So I am a open source intelligence analyst. So part of my job is actually to use facial recognition to hunt down targets that I'm looking for.
So the example I think of, and I don't know who you work for or with, was when Bellingcat found the two men that had sought to poison the Skripals in Salisbury and did essentially kill Dawn Sturgis. That was facial recognition technology and open source analysis.
Yeah, exactly that. So what I'd say is there are tools out there right now that are unbelievably powerful. So one example is one called PimEyes. And when I was searching for a target, it actually returned her child because of the facial similarities between her young child and the target I was looking for.
Yeah.
Now, I know your question is, what should we be worried about?
Yeah.
And for me, it really comes down to who is operating this technology.
Yeah.
So we've heard discussions today about surgeons who are inappropriately touching their co-workers.
Yes.
Obviously, the nurse, Lewis Letby, who we trusted to care for babies who ended up killing them. The problem I feel is, are the people who we entrust to use this technology, like the individual user, rather than the politicians,
right?
Are they going to be using this technology responsibly? Now, there's usually like a developed vetting in these types of government positions, but people slip through the cracks.
But doesn't that apply to everything? I mean, you could almost say that about cars.
I suppose you could, but my worry is just there'll probably be one instance where this happens,
yes,
and then
of
there'll
course.
be a huge debate around it. And
well, I'm thinking of stalking then and coercive behaviour, am I? And you could, and not a private citizen could access some of the technology that you use professionally and use it for deeply nefarious purposes.
Yes, they could, and I guess this is where it comes down to.
And once it's out there, you can't really get it back in. So there's no earthly way you could confine the use of this sort of technology to state-sanctioned bodies, is there?
No, I mean, it's already out there. Like, you can pay off the shelf if you really do want to see how much of your face is out there. You can load it into a technology like PIMIs and see what it returns. I guess everyone just needs to be extremely careful.
I'm not on. What do you run it through? If that's not a stupid question. So I give you a face.
Yeah.
What do you run that face through, Harry?
So the one I prefer, which I find I guess the most effective, is a tool called PIMIs.
Yeah.
And basically what that does is it scrapes that image and looks for similar facial recognition.
But looks where?
Just on the internet, whatever.
So any image at all on the internet that has match up points with the image that you've scraped.
Exactly. So when I tried it on myself, I found my image from 5 years ago at a wedding that I attended.
On someone's Facebook page?
No, it wasn't on the Facebook page. It was on, you know how people upload, I guess, wedding albums online?
Yeah.
Something like that. It will find that, no problem.
So you've got a face and you're trying to find either a name or a location, and this really helps.
It's extremely easy. Yeah.
So you've completely changed the course of my thoughts on this then. I mean, the concerns aren't going away, but it's almost like the feasibility or the validity of the concerns are coming under attack because the horse has already bolted. The horse has already gone.
Yeah, I feel that
and there was nothing we could have done about it in the first place. This is, it would be like trying to regulate the internet.
Exactly. There'll be some, like tech entrepreneur who thinks this is a cool thing to do, and they create it. And it is a useful tool. Like you can.
Well, clearly.
Like with anything, like you brought the example of a car. You can use your car to, drive on holiday, or use it to run through a crowd of people in London.
And no one therefore calls for the ban on cars.
Exactly.
I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, and I sense you wouldn't anyway, but what sort of work do you do? Who gives you the targets that you are sought to seek?
So I mainly go after financial scammers.
Okay.
So in like investment scammers or crypto scammers, that kind of thing.
And who pays your wages, if you don't mind me asking?
The company I work for.
I see. So I bring in the company if my business interests are being damaged by scammers, and say, can you find these crooks?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool beans. Have you got any gadgets?
I'd rather not say.
Okay, no, fair enough. I don't want some gadgets. I love gadgets. Give me a gadget. Thank you, Harry. Very helpful. Apologies for bringing my innate immaturity into the conversation, but hey-ho. Hal's in Brighton. Professor Hal is in Brighton. Hal, what made you pick up the phone?
Good day, James.
Hello,
no, I don't often speak to you outside of Mystery Hour, but
no,
this is absolutely chilling, and I don't often get to fly my law degree. But Connolly versus Rice, 1966, was the case law which says you are not required to tell the state your name and address unless you've been either driving or you've committed an offence.
I don't know what, your phone's gone funny. It's gone all muffled, and I mean, you're a veteran caller to the programme.
Sorry.
So there we go. Fixed
so sorry. So Connolly versus Rice was the original case law which said that the state cannot demand your name and address unless you've been driving or you've committed an offence.
Right.
So this isn't just 1984, it's also Minority Report, isn't it?
Yes.
Or Elysium.
Well, potentially it is. I'm still not fully clear about why, but I shall listen.
Let me tell you, because on my Facebook is a film of when they were running the trials of this, and a chap was walking towards a camera, and he pulled a scarf up.
Yeah.
And the officer says, pull the scarf down so you can be filmed. Yeah. He said no, and it then went up several levels, and he ended up being arrested for a public order offence. That's where we're going with this. If you don't comply, you get arrested. It's like having the telescreens in the high street in 1984.
And I respond by saying, well, if he's got nothing to hide, why would he want to hide his face?
Absolutely chilling, yes. What's next? DNA. So let's have some DNA off it at the same time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I am, as you might recall, I was a police officer in a former life.
I know.
And I've turned into a bit of a bedwetting liberal.
Good. That's my fault, I think. You must stop listening to this show.
It is. It is chilling, I think, and nothing to hide, nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. That's chilling in itself.
But only, I mean, I don't think I disagree with anything that you've said, up to and including Minority Report. But it's only chilling when you accept the possibility of a government in the country where you live, or the society where you live, that would be dedicated to nefarious, using this technology to oppressive and nefarious ends. And when you were a police officer, you didn't believe that the country in which you live was capable of doing that. I don't imagine.
No, I didn't, because there's checks and balances between what the average person would deem acceptable and what the state could actually do. But I think we're blurring that.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, exactly.
I think it is. And I just think, literally, that there's the state knowing where you are at any given time, because maybe 20 years ago you got into a bit of a pickle with the law. I think that's a step too far.
Your phone's gone funny again, Hal. We'll catch up properly soon. That's the issue, though, because I think you're right. But you can't. We haven't got the sledgehammer or the scalpel with which to absolutely eviscerate this problem, to really illuminate this problem. That could happen to you, because at the moment there'll be a lot of people that say, I've got nothing to worry about. I'm not Extinction Rebellion. So if you're thinking that, then that he's right though, isn't he? You've got to show me your face. Well, what's wrong with that? I haven't done anything wrong. Yeah, but what if they're looking for you because you objected to a massive, environmentally disastrous... If you were objecting to sewage being pumped into rivers and you protested about that, you're not allowed to do that anymore. Suella Braverman's decided you're not allowed to protest peacefully about that anymore. So think of something you care about, something that you might conceivably want to protest about peacefully, or violently, actually, as long as you're not hurting people. Something you really care about enough. And there should be something where everyone can think of something, even people on polar opposite ends of any political spectrum. You know, I really want to protest about refugees coming here. Well, you're not allowed to anymore. You're not allowed to protest peacefully about that. I really want to protest about sewage being pumped into rivers. You're not allowed to anymore. But you do, because you've got to. You've got to draw public attention to this terrible thing. The minute you do it, you're busted. Because you show your face in public again at any other point subsequent, that's it. They're coming for you. Is that chilling? Does that sound frightening to you? I've got a fairly strong feeling it should.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm so glad you're talking about this, James. The current government would not hesitate to bring in irreversible laws. No such thing really as an irreversible law. Although Keir Starmer does seem at the moment to be struggling to work out where his reverse gear might be when it comes to legislation, to stay in power in the name of law and order. I think private companies might just start using facial recognition anyway, and the government won't stop them. Well, I don't know when you sent that text, but they already are, as Henry in Hertford confirmed for us. We haven't hit the point. We haven't hit the pressure point. Like the absolute, oh, blimey, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, no, I don't like this sort of thing at all. There may not be one, of course. Lauren is in Fife. Lauren, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Big fan of the show.
Why, thank you.
I think some of the other callers have made great points about the erosion of privacy, but the point that I wanted to bring up is that, these technologies, if they're implemented in the sort of immediate future, they've been shown to misidentify or not be as adept at identifying people from non-white backgrounds, which means we run the risk in the immediate sense of convicting people of color at higher rates than they should be, or wrongly convicting them. So,
no, that's definitely a valid point. Although I note you say if we did it very, very quickly, that would be the case, because the nature of the technology, as I understand it, is that it would evolve to solve that problem. And in fact, I think it's more widespread in China at the moment than it is anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, but I think that's even one of the issues with the comparison to DNA, which is a solid science. You can look at it and say, yes, this is this. It's A to A.
Yes.
Whereas if you're using that now, it's basically a racist technology. It's just machine learning that hasn't really come up to speed. Hasn't
done the learning yet. How broad is the disparity? Do we know? I've seen the figure of 97% somewhere, but I'm afraid I wasn't really concentrating and I can't remember what that was.
I don't have that to hand, but
it doesn't matter because
sure
one is too
available.
many, isn't it? So I mean, pertinent to the short term introduction of it, but not necessarily an obstacle to long-term enthusiasm for it. Thank you, Lauren. Mark's from the Kingdom of Fife to the what is it, the Principality, the Kingdom of Fife to the Principality of Monaco. There you go. That's nice. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hope you're well. Thank you. Just regarding the face recognition, I moved to Monaco a year ago for work, and it's used all the time here. But I think the difference is, from my point of view, is you accept it, and obviously it's very different, but there's no crime here whatsoever. And it's very discreet, so no one even talks about it. But I think the point is that because it's a principality, there's the same government. There's no change of government. And in the UK, I'd be concerned about who's in control of all this stuff. That's the difference.
What do they use it for? Do you know? I mean, I'm still being a bit daft on this. The idea of it's everywhere. What do they use it for?
Just to monitor who's coming in, who's going out.
So if someone does a bit of shoplifting, then they'll be caught almost immediately because you don't just run it because Henry runs it through the internet, but the authorities can run it through every CCTV camera in the Principality. And if you have that face that you're looking for pops up somewhere else, an alarm goes off and they've got you.
Exactly. That's what they use it for.
Is it?
But as I say, it's very discreet and you don't feel like you're being surveyed at all. But, UK-wise, I wouldn't be comfortable with it because I don't trust anyone that's in charge there, especially, with them selling national health records to this American company. And you just don't know what's going to be done with it.
I think it's in Nice as well. I think the company that did it in Monaco had got a few years ago reading about them introducing it in Nice, which, of course, would be subject to the democratic vicissitudes that you describe in the context of this country. So your attitude is defined by the knowledge that you can't imagine the ruler of Monaco ever wanting to do you particular harm for protesting peacefully, and B, you're not intending to do anything criminal in the near future. So what on earth have you got to worry about?
Exactly, and if it helps keep my family safe, then I'm all for it, as long as it's in hands that can be trusted with it.
And there is
That's
the
only
kicker,
difference.
isn't it? There is the kicker, as long as it's in hands that can be trusted with. And what are those hands? And also, what is the protest? You might have, Mark, a crisis of political conscience and decide that you don't want to live in a country ruled by a hereditary ruler anymore. You want to live in a proper democracy. But the minute you draw a banner and go out into the street with it, you could be jailed.
Or thrown out of the country. I think that's probably more likely.
All 3 hours, so it's cheaper. I think there is crime in Monaco, just not the kind of crime that ordinary people encounter on a sort of day-to-day basis. 11:54 is the time. Charlie's in Greenwich. Charlie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm just listening to this discussion. I find I'm really conflicted about it.
You and me both.
It was about a decade ago. I was on a jury at the Old Bailey, and it was a murder case.
Are you sure you're allowed to talk to me about it?
Yeah, because this stuff was public. The case was public. I can't talk about the jury's deliberations or anything like that.
Okay.
But, this guy was convicted. there was so much evidence, which was CCTV tracking, all the whereabouts and where this person was going. And I thought at the time, gosh, if everyone knew what they could do, and this is a decade ago, then maybe less crime would be committed. But then I realised only recently a friend had a laptop stolen from their car, and the Met Police basically said, well, we don't have the manpower to trawl through hours and hours of CCTV. We're just going to close the case. And you think, right, so they go through all of this for serious crime, but what they deem kind of minor crimes, they don't have the resource. But if we had recognition and AI, then it would all be done automatically. And would that be a good thing? But then all of this discussion about, but who's in control? Who's telling you what the crime is? It's
that's where I've changed. Where I've sort of, particularly with the legislation regarding peaceful protest, and also, I hope this isn't inappropriate of me, but also the utter awfulness of some of the politicians in positions of power over the last few years. I wouldn't put anything past Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I totally agree. I mean, I was handing out EU flags at the Royal Albert Hall on Saturday. Stone him! Exactly. So, people are calling for us to be banned. I mean, we were basically trying to show, people what a dreadful thing this botched Brexit deal is for our touring musicians.
Yes,
they can't. They have to have work permits. They have to have visas, increased costs, and all of this kind of stuff. Exactly, and we had support of the Musicians Union and Independent Society of Musicians. They were very supportive of us trying to bring that cause to light. But all of the coverage has just been, Ramonas waving their flags.
Yes,
but
what you have to remember, Charlie, is that the people having a little fit of the vapours and throwing their dummies out of their prams, they are the real champions of free speech in this country, and they're definitely not snowflakes, because that's the word they use to describe everybody else. So it's important to bear that in mind.
You're quite right. Free speech when it's speech when it's their kind of free speech.
I care about free speech, but I certainly don't want people waving completely innocuous flags independently and autonomously at the Royal Albert Hall. That kind of thing must be clamped down on immediately.
And they're completely against cancel culture, apart from when it's cancelling people who
down
they
with
don't
cancel
like.
culture. Down with cancel culture. Quite. I agree. Well,
but anyway,
well done for doing what you did.
That's the worry, right? That's the worry.
Yeah, of course it's the worry.
People that we have in control, and you only have to look at other countries, like you say, China or Russia or North Korea, to see where it could really go badly wrong.
Well, you do, and I sit here thinking, we'll never be like. All right, the kind of people that wrote the articles about Charlie's flags, what would happen if they were in charge? You actually have who was it that said it should actually be banned? Some absolute Herbert should ban it, ban flags. Okay, well, here's someone who's not observing your ban on a flag. What are you going to do? Use facial. Find him. And then what are you going to do with it? Stone him! It's insane. And, of course, post-Farage, I suppose, you have to recognise the fact that swathes of the population can be persuaded to dance to the tune of completely repellent idiots. It's just a question of when the dance stops. Harvey's in Wellingborough. Harvey, what would you like to say?
My thought is that if you have a system which allows and promotes the use of CCTV, that's fantastic. On the other hand, you have to accept that there's going to be an erosion of your own privacy if you accept it. And ultimately, it comes down to the who's holding that power and that responsibility.
Yes.
I go back to the 1980s, the Yorkshire Ripper case, where the amount of administrative burden that was placed on the police during that time, they had to create an entirely new fortified building with the amount of documentation that they had to sift through.
Right.
And you have that situation where the previous caller was talking about that laptop that had been stolen.
Yes.
And yes, there is always going to be a need to balance crime, but there's also going to be a need to balance, I guess, the morality behind who is in charge of using that equipment. So you have a government that is currently using
not even that. Yeah, I mean, that's because the government is using it in conjunction with legislation. But private sector people, private individuals can use it already. I could find you by the time Sheila Fogarty gets here. If you send me a photo, obviously.
Certainly.
You could use Google Images. That's a form of facial recognition technology, isn't it? And so on some level?
I think they've been used in a private sector as well. I don't think that's an unnecessary use.
No, I don't. But that's it. I mean, that is it. You highlight precisely the problem where we began and indeed where we finish, which is the technology per se. No technology per se. It's all gone a bit Oppenheimer. No technology per se is bad. It's what you do with the technology that poses the moral and indeed the legal dilemma. And I think it's fair to say that we haven't solved that one. So I look forward to returning to similar territory in the future. But my goodness me, that sense, it's funny, isn't it? I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's no point having a mind if you never change it. And what should change your mind? Well, facts. When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? And the facts have changed, I think, politically in the last few years. You've realised that you do live in a country where complete idiots can achieve power via democratic votes, largely because, of course, the media is so dedicated to lying to those voters.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I need a little name. I think I've got one for the conversation we're going to have next. Subjects that are not at first glance obvious for inclusion in the country's most popular commercial talk show, renowned for its hard-hitting, pungent opinions and robust forensic questioning of callers and a sharing of astonishing personal experiences. Speaking of which, do you remember that lovely woman who rang in a couple of weeks ago to tell us about tracking down their bikes to Poland? 36 grand's worth of high-performance bicycle. That's the correct turn of phrase. 36 grand's worth of high-performance bicycle that she and her partner tracked down all the way to Poland. Using the Instagram and social and all of that. It's a big story today on page 10 of the Telegraph. Once again, my news antennae failing to twitch at all in the presence of an actual story. So I didn't even establish the name of the lady that rang in, but it's included in the story. Emily Smith. So it was Emily that rang us and her partner Damien Groves, both elite cyclists who hired a private investigator and drove all the way to Poland to retrieve their stolen bike. Do you remember that call? I bet we didn't even clip it, did we? Did we even clip it? It's national news today. Page 10 of the Daily Telegraph. I bet we didn't even clip it. I said at the time, that's a cracking tale. But it didn't occur to me to ring any contacts in the national news media and say, well, any other contacts I work for the national news media. Did we even put it up on our own website? It's page 10 of the Telegraph today. It's a national news story. It flipping happened live on this show. And we just missed it. Oh, it's just James with another one of his amazing calls. You see, that's the problem with being victims of your own success. Probably had calls in the last hour that were worthy of national news. Certainly in the hour before. I bet Henry in Hartford's worth a bit of a feature, isn't he, in one of the Sunday magazines? From his bedroom in Hartford, he tracks down scammers and fugitives. That is a story, lads. I don't know. What am I doing? I'm doing journalism tutorials now. It's a great little tale there. We'd track him down. You've got his number. Phone him back. Also, you can go and shadow him for 24 hours. You get a lovely little Sunday Times magazine feature out of that. Why did I go off on that particular tangent? Can anyone... Oh, yes. So that's the kind of stuff you expect on this show. Hard-hitting, big stories, pungent analysis. But sometimes we have a lovely time, don't we, together, with relatively soft stories, relatively sort of quite... Well, the description I had come up with during the last news bulletin was slippers... I was going to say slippers and pipe subjects. Right, slippers and pipes. We have a nice... some of the stuff we do about reading and culture is a bit slippers and pipes. It's like, oh, we can just sit back. We're not going to have a row about this. Everyone can relax. Nobody's going to get upset. No sort of gammony Brexiters are going to be having sort of terrible fits of conniptions while listening to this. It's all going to be lovely and pleasant. And I like those subjects. I can't do them every day. I've got a brand to look after. But I do like them. And I think we've got one today. I think we've got one today. I was tempted to do the story about the pub that puts the prices up when it's busy. Because you're probably drinking in one. Not right now, obviously, but it's the largest pub chain in the country. It owns Yates, Slug and Lettuce, Be at One, and they have been for a while, across all 800 sites across Britain, charging more for drinks when the bars are busier. But I didn't see that really expanding to fill an hour. Do you know what I mean? I mean, where would we go with that? It might be a moral dimension. I'm not sure. That's nice. Someone says we need to change the motto of the programme. So if you build it, they will come, and you'll miss it, mate. Yep, that seems about right. If you build it, they will come, and you won't even notice until 2 weeks later. It's on page 10 of the Daily Telegraph, and you go, hang on a minute, that was a caller to my show. That's not a... So what's the slippers and pipe story for today? I love this. George Orwell, I think, picked up on this. George Orwell picked up on the fact that there is the Brits, the British, the English perhaps even, in particular, have a peculiar... affinity for hobbies. We like. In fact, I'm going to find you the Orwell quote because it's a beautiful bit of writing, as with so much of what he put down on paper. The idea of hobbies being a great boon to both staying young at heart and staving off depression. Here you go. Credit to the leader writer in the Times today. As so often, George Orwell said it best. In England, Your England, which is a beautiful essay, you should really read it if you can, about the soul of the nation and the difference really between patriotism in its purest sense and patriotism that Dr. Johnson described as the last refuge of a scoundrel. But he writes, an English characteristic, which is so much a part of us that we barely notice it, is the addiction of hobbies and spare time occupations. We are, he wrote, a nation of flower lovers, but also of stamp collectors, pigeon fanciers, amateur carpenters, coupon snippers, darts players, crossword puzzle fans. You know already, perhaps, that dementia can be kept at bay by daily sudokus and crosswords, and anything that keeps the old little grey cells whirring can contribute to helping this player in this area. And he wrote that in 1941. It's amazing how many of them still apply. I've got a dartboard at home. I'm not that much of a coupon snipper, but I sometimes do the online equivalent. I do crossword puzzles and word games online, and I've increasingly become an ornithologist. Well, that's a bit of a grand way of describing it. And the news story is that having active hobbies leaves you happier and healthier, which is, I think, a beautiful story that almost swims against the tide of presumption, you know? The mickey taking that we do for many hobbies. Almost any hobby can be prone to mickey taking. And yet you quietly know as you go train spotting on a Saturday, or as you dig into, or as you indulge in another bout of furious philately, you kind of know that you are feeling better for doing it. It is good for you. I have really got into, I nearly said live on the radio, that I've really got into birds lately, but you have to be careful how you phrase these things. I have really got into birds lately, and to the point where now I can recognise quite a few, and I downloaded a little app that you record them and it tells you what it is, and now I can be quite boring when I'm out with my children and I hear something in a hedge and I'll say, oh, look at that. Yes, that's a chiff-chaff. Or that's a robin making its alarm call. And I'm never going to be brilliant. I'm never going to be Chris Packham or anything like that. But it is good for... I'm going to use a useful word here, actually, that they don't use in the Times coverage today. It's very good for my soul. It's very good for my soul. It's very good for my sort of equilibrium. And there's an amazing young man on social media. I don't understand why he uses a fisheye lens. He's got a French name. Do you know who I'm talking about? He's a train spotter. He is possibly the most infectious social media character. That's the fella, Francis Bourgeois, which I don't think, because I was so smitten with the fella that I looked him up. I don't think that's his real name. I think that's like a pen name. That's like the name he uses for his train spotting activities. And he wears a fisheye lens on a stick strapped to his head and films himself train spotting. And the excitement that he feels when a train he hasn't seen before comes chuffing up the tracks, it's balm for the soul. It is absolutely beautiful. You feel better by a form of emotional osmosis. And if it really does help you stay young at heart, a hobby like that lad's going to live to about 212. Seriously. And train spotting when I was growing up was one of the things we were supposed to look askance at. Playing video games, I suppose, is a hobby. But the widespread nature of it begins to make it feel like something else, doesn't it? Just to rub it in, James, I watched a televised interview about the bicycle story on BBC Breakfast this morning. Heads are going to roll upstairs when I get off air today. How did you miss this massive story of national importance? It's just outrageous. But that's not what we're talking. Well, cycling is a hobby, of course. So I've got a question, but it's a slippers and pipe question. It's not a, 20 paces at dawn kind of question. It's not an action stations, battle stations question. It's a really simple question, and I really want you to answer it. And I'd love. I don't want to exclude anybody from joining in, but I suppose the stranger the hobby, perhaps the better the story, or the bigger the change, the better the story. Because I want to know how your hobby changed your life. Let me give you a little more of the detail. 93,263 people. This is looking at elderly people, but I'm extending it to absolutely everybody. But the survey, the research looked at just shy of 100,000 people from 16 countries. More than 4,000 from England took part. And it looked at how happy and healthy you were and how you rated your own general life satisfaction. 78.1% of over 65s in England said they had some form of hobby, which put us surprisingly low on the league table, flies in the face of what Orwell said. Denmark came out on top with 96%, and it's published in the journal Nature Medicine today. It revealed that having a hobby was associated with fewer depressive symptoms, better self-reported health, more happiness, and higher life satisfaction, with life satisfaction most consistently related to hobbies. So, how did your hobby change your life? 0345 6060 973. And I do like the idea. I used to do quite a lot of raving in my youth. Don't laugh. My daughters do more than enough of that. But I was there. I mean, I was at the Hacienda nightclub in Manchester in 1988, right? So this is one of those rare, probably the only example in my life of me being pretty close to the front of the queue when it came to a major cultural moment. I was there all summer, and I went at least once a week. And I moved back to Manchester 2 years later when rave culture was still kicking. And if you'd said to me then that I was going to be live on national radio 30 years later talking about how I can identify a chiff-chaff from a hedgerow, I would have laughed in your face. So I like the idea of late onset hobbies that perhaps have taken you by surprise and that you genuinely believe have actually changed your life. And it doesn't have to be, I left my wife and ran off with my fencing partner. It could be that you just know that your equilibrium has improved. Your soul is being fed in a way. Your hobby is reaching parts that nothing else you've ever done has ever reached. So that's all. So this isn't, as I say, it's not a fire and brimstone hour or even a fireworks hour. It's a slippers and pipe hour. And you're welcome to join in. What is your response to the news, to the research showing that hobbies are a key to a happy and healthy later life? You are supremely unsurprised by this because you know already that your hobby has changed your life. And let's go for the coolest hobby as well. That's going to be so subjective, but I've already had one come in. Mudlarks. You see, this is from Wimble Womble, which I don't think is your given name, but come in via Twitter. As a regular Thames mudlark, which you need a licence to mudlark, by the way, I can tell you that pottering about, looking at the foreshore and finding the occasional interesting piece is a brilliant way of having some calm in a busy city. Just remember to watch the tides and that you need a valid permit. There was a wonderful, I'm now going to knit two stories together in an absolutely spectacular fashion, all right? There was a wonderful exhibition of mudlarks at a place near me in West London about a year ago. Was it before lockdown or in the middle, one of the lockdown breaks? And there were lots of mudlarks there who were all showing the different things that they'd found. And it's like, I don't know, something about contact with history, touching history, finding history. Now I know what you're thinking. You think, how are you going to knit this together with another major news story? The exhibition took place about 100 yards from where Daniel Khalif was first spotted in Chiswick on Saturday. So when all the cameras turned up and it was filming the area where he was reportedly seen before being captured a few miles northwest, my first thought was, oh, that's where that lovely mudlarking experience was, that lovely mudlarking exhibition. And that is called going bi-topical.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
And of course, as ever on this programme, why do you think hobbies, or your hobby in particular, has such a beneficial effect on your mental health? To the extent that research suggests not only is it going to help you live longer, but it will improve the quality of your life during that period of extended longevity. Here is a text with a first line that certainly pricks the interest without ever delivering on it. So, Izzy, no criticism intended at all, but goodness me, you didn't need to mention it, and it's just left me feeling very curious. Due to unfortunate circumstances, I was suspended from work last year and took up knitting to keep myself occupied. Fast forward a year later, I love to spend the evenings listening to podcasts and knitting. I'm now looking at joining a local knitting group. I'm only 29. It brings a calm to my mind that I really appreciate in this fast-paced world. There might be something in that. It might be one of the antidotes to a short attention span that we've talked about a lot as a consequence of technology exacerbated by lockdown. Hobbies that actually demand quite a sustained period of concentration and focus could be doing young people it really important good, even as we examine the benefits of this kind of thing for older people. Let's go to Sandhurst first. Philip is there. Philip, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello,
nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
We chatted about the longevity of pylons some years ago, but
pylons,
so
that's a hobby.
It's nice to speak to you outside the restrictions of Mystery Hour.
Go on.
So, going back, I don't know, maybe 3 years now. Just April, May of first lockdown.
Yeah.
There'd been a series on the telly. It was like Bake Off, but it was jewellery based.
Oh yes.
And I think they'll do it. They'll do it again, but I haven't seen it pop up since. But I thought I can do that.
Yeah.
I'd done an apprenticeship in the army, like filing bits of metal and making stuff and polishing things. And
what sort of stuff? What sort of stuff did you make in the army?
I was an armourer, so I made bits for guns and pistols and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, it was I went straight in from school at 16 and was given a big lump of metal to file away into nothing. And so I thought, I can do that. It looks pretty good and I'm interested in it. The day that I was supposed to start my night class, wifey got the big C, or diagnosed with the big C.
Oh,
so
sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. She's fine. She was one of the lucky ones.
Excellent.
But she said, I said, well, obviously I'm not going to go. You know, we've had this life-changing bit of news. No, she said, no, you got to go, because no doubt over the next year you might want to put your mind to other things, sort of thing. So I went, and it's bloody brilliant. She lets me go because I bring back shiny stuff.
Like a little, you're like a little magpie, aren't you, Philip?
I've made little silver cancer ribbons and things for her sister, and just bits and pieces. And it's. And
did you have a skill? Did you have an affinity for? Because you must have found something when you were doing it in the army. It must have reached a part that was still there. It was still itching years later.
It's that. Filing, monotonous to a certain extent, but it's like, I guess that's why it's called a pastime rather than activity. You know, it's not wakeboarding or jumping off a building or something. These are hobbies.
Yes, but that's
the true nature of a hobby is that you don't necessarily need to think about what you're doing. I know you need to focus on that, but your mind can turn off to a certain extent, like fishing or
that's what it is. That's the difference. Yeah. So you enter a zone, so you might be active. I mean, train spotting, running up and down the platforms rather than just standing there. Or rushing somewhere to see the train. But you're right. There's a liminal. There's almost like a mental space that you access only when you're doing the kind of thing that you've just described, the level of focus. I must read you this, though, before you go, Philip. Matt just texted to say, I actually remember Philip's pylon call from a few years ago, and now I feel a crushing sense that I might be spending too much time listening to you. I need to take up mudlarking. He could take up silversmithing, couldn't he?
James, that pylon call garnered 4 answers, and it was way before the time you were dishing out board games.
Well,
so
don't be bitter.
If you do want to send me one...
No, it doesn't work like that. Cheeky beggar. Honestly, you can wait your turn like everybody else, or head over to mysteryhour.co.uk. Oh, and your wife is in remission, is she? She's better?
Yeah, 2 years clear.
Look at that.
Coming up in December, and it was a... Well,
oh, mate, what a lovely story.
It was a hell of a challenge.
Of course it was.
Thankfully,
it was. And how clever of her as well, and how loving of her as well to recognise that you'd need a bit of time outside of your head once a week, heading down to the silversmithing classes. I love that. You could hang on a minute. You could combine the two. I reckon. You actually make sort of jewellery based on bullets and stuff like that.
No, I didn't. No, that's all a bit sort of like. No, you could. What do they call that? That's sort of like trench art, I think they call it. No, I haven't done that, but I've done little rings and. No,
you're right. You carry on doing
like
what you do. You're doing lovely stuff. Actually, I was just sort of thinking of kind of new markets, but you don't need one. That's lovely. That I never would have thought of that. Fran's in Farnborough. Fran, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm so excited about talking to you. Hi.
Well, I won't live up to expectations, Fran. Let me apologise in advance.
No, I can't wait. I met my husband like such a long time ago. I'm quite old now, but I met him when I was 18 in 1983, and we were still together, and we were both punk rockers. And he lived in Woking, and I lived in Farnborough, and I met him through mutual friends, and he was in a punk band, and I was so excited. And we got together, and then it probably took me about 4 weeks, but I got myself in the band and started singing, and he was the drummer. And we're still in a band now.
Punk?
So, yeah, we do punk covers now as opposed to originals. Punk covers, but we do ska, new wave, indie, rock, the whole thing, really. And it's the biggest passion of my life, apart from him and my kids.
Yes.
And it's just so fun. We love it.
You can hear it in your voice, actually, even just talking about it. And so your life without this would have been a much more grey experience, I think.
Well, like everybody over the years, you experience all kinds of stress, and obviously lost both my parents, my kids. I adopted both my kids with my husband, and we've been through an awful lot. And without this sort of keeping us, I mean, there was a period of time when they were little that I gave up for a bit because they just needed me constantly.
Yes, of course.
For about, I think they were about 4 when I went back to it, and we got baby. So all our gig money would go straight to the babysitter.
Love it.
It became a bit of a joke, really, that here's our gig money for the evening. And they just grew up with, are you going to a gig tonight, Mum? And watch me putting on my daft makeup and put on my punky clothes, and off I'd go. But I'm still doing it now, and they're grown up, and they just sort of look at me and roll their eyes.
There's a lot of people mentioning music, actually, because although it's not as obvious, especially live performance, it's not as obviously a hobby as what Philip was talking about, that sort of notion of. Isn't. But it does do something to the endorphins, doesn't it? It does sort of release something that you're not going to get anywhere else. Here's another one. This is Tommy, who's in Taunton. I like that. Fran in Farnborough and Tommy in Taunton. I've been gagging to message in on loads of occasions, but I'm finally qualified. 8 years ago, I turned all my hobbies into jobs. I'm now a piano tuner and lead singer in a professional Beach Boys tribute band. You should do a double header. You know you've got competition. I saw one story yesterday. I forgot to mention it on air, and I thought it was made up or that I'd misunderstood. But Robert Peston and Ed Balls have started a punk band together.
God, I want to support them.
Well, I think it should be the other way around. You've got way more experience on the clock than they have. I'll put you in touch. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. No, it's not. Well, it is. I mean, technically coming up to 1 o'clock, but in the context of what happens next on the show, it's coming up to 12:30. And Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This one has gone gratifyingly bonkers. I shall be returning to the calls imminently. Just this one will get you. You need a heart of stone not to be moved by this one. My friend Scott has been in touch to say, I worked in an art shop when I was 17. A fella came in. Must have been 75. And Scott uses capital letters here. You're going to have to trust me when I tell you that's quite rare. He's no Donald Trump. He'd just discovered that he could paint. He'd bring in portraits and they were amazing. He started crying that he'd only just realised he had this talent. What a mixture of sadness and happiness. There's something in that, actually. But always better late than never. Fraser Knight is here to tell us a little bit more about the story you will have picked up in the news bulletins about landlords essentially being accused of extortion almost. Fraser, where are we?
James, this is looking into the differences in the leasehold system with freeholders. Now, just for a bit of context, around 5 million homes in the UK are leasehold, meaning on top of the money that you pay to buy the flat, you also need to then pay service charges and maintenance to the building owners. But we've heard some concerns from flat owners that those freeholders are essentially rigging the system. And what we're told is that they're buying up multiple blocks of flats, they're then setting up their own associated businesses to appoint as contractors. And it's been described to me as a major conflict of interest, with these leaseholders feeling like they don't have much of a say, particularly because not only are the freeholders finding ways to pocket more money from these flat owners, they're using the rising cost of living as an excuse to inflate those charges exponentially. And one of those leaseholders is Amit Sharma. He owns a number of flats around Manchester and says that his freeholders taking clear advantage of them to a point where he reckons they've been overcharged by around £6,000 over the past few years.
It's a kind of a very nice setup to loot, using all the laws to their benefit, to their advantage, to actually pull out money. This is really ridiculous, and which has landed me into really, they've spoiled my credit file. It's a lot.
Now, there are ways to challenge costs that flat owners think are unfair, but we're told freeholders are using bullying tactics and in some cases court orders to force people to pay. And of course, there's a huge barrier to going through the process too, because of the large amount of time and money that's needed to do that. Harry Scoffin is a housing campaigner and he's been calling for reform for quite some time.
I mean, the system is not about rules and regulations, it's about control. Almost there's an assumption that when leaseholders are being ripped off or they're facing abusive treatment from freeholders and managing agents, they have to spend their lives becoming serial litigators going to tribunal.
So the big question is, what are the government doing about this, James? Well, Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, has promised reform. There has already been one change in terms of ground rent. But largely, the wider root and branch reform that many are calling for, we're told, is being dragged out. But the Housing Secretary has previously said he wants to abolish the leasehold system altogether and has hinted at further reforms to come in the King's speech in November.
And we've got the Ombudsman coming in later today, the Housing Ombudsman, to talk to Tom Swarbrick. This will be brought to their attention, no doubt.
It will indeed, yeah.
People caught in this particular pincer movement might want to ring in themselves.
Well, there's a lot of people who have said to me that they feel like there's a real lack of accountability here. They feel like they don't own their flats despite paying all that money for it. And they say that when they raise the issue, sometimes it feels like it's so difficult to do anything about it. So no doubt there will be questions for the Ombudsman this afternoon on that.
What time's he in, do you know?
From 4 with Tom.
Great stuff. 12:37. Thank you, Fraser. I've got a mental block on your name, I should warn you, because I'm going to call you Zach at some point, and I don't know why. Zach apparently there's is it an R&B artist called Zach Knight, who did Boom Diggity, Diggity Boom Boom Diggity or something.
I'll take it.
I don't know. Does that ever happen to you?
I've never had Zach. I've had other names.
But for some reason, I've got Zach Knight stuck in my head. So whenever I'm about to say Fraser Knight, I'm thinking, no, it's Zach Knight. No, it's not Zach. It's Fraser. So just to warn you in advance.
Maybe that's my new hobby.
I think I called Ben Ken Bentish once. So you should take your wins where you find them. Thank you very much, Fraser. Definitely not Zach Knight. 12:38 is the time. Back to the question of hobbies and their life-changing potential. Carol is in Newark. Carol, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Carol.
Hiya. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in January 2021, and then the same year I lost my little dog at 14 and a half, so I was in a pretty sort of dark space, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
And I had some therapy through Macmillan Cancer Care, and it was just a throwaway remark this lady made to me about, well, what hobbies have you got?
Right.
And I said, well, I like doing embroidery, but you run out of wall space, so...
Yes.
Then, when I came off the phone to her, I thought, what have I always wanted to do that I've never done? And I thought, learn to play a musical instrument. So I'm learning to play the clarinet.
How are you getting on?
Brill.
I
love it.
Have you got a knack? Have you got? Do you think you've got? Don't go all modest on me. But do you think? Have you got a gift? I
don't know that I've got a gift.
An affinity.
But I think I did years ago in my youth. I did Pitman shorthand and whatnot, and I think that kind of helps with the brain power of symbols and reading the music. So I won't say I got a particular knack, but I do a lot of practice. But I absolutely love it, and it's saved me from a huge black hole.
Well, that was what I was about to talk to you about, because that's what I want to zone in on. Is trying to put into words that emotional bounty that you unearth. It's something to do with the focus, isn't it? It's something to do.
Yes, it is. It's having something that is a challenge to me.
Yes.
At my age, I asked the music tutor, "Am I too old at 75 to learn?" She says, "Nobody's ever too old to learn to play music."
Yes.
And my little dog was my life, and he went. And then I just got this sort of nothingness, where I couldn't think of anything. And then I started doing it. I thought, well, I don't know if I'll be able to do it or not, but I can. And
why did you pick the clarinet?
I can read it.
Why did you pick the clarinet?
Well, I thought about doing the piano, but I didn't particularly want to have a piano in the house.
They're not very portable, are they? Although
No,
they are these days. You can get electric ones, but no.
Yeah, you can, but we've got a camper van, so we go on holiday. So I'll take my clarinet on holiday in its case, and I take my books with me. And I've practiced in some very bizarre places, like the laundry room in a campsite.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely.
And I went, one campsite had a little fishing lake, and so I went down there, and there was a little bench and everything. So I played my music to the neighbouring horses in the field, and they were neighing back.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. They recognise the tune.
Yeah, I recognise what you're trying to play.
You hum it, I'll play it.
Yeah, I mean, eventually what I'd like to do, my tutor's on about putting me in for my level 1 exam, maybe Easter next year. And where I live in Newark, they've got a Newark concert band, and they've got a sort of beginners section, and my ambition is to join that.
Absolutely that. Well, what sort of stuff is it? Is it classical or jazz? Or because the clarinet's one of those instruments that can really go anywhere, can't it?
Yes. I mean, you're sort of working off a book particularly, but I've ordered another book. You can, once you sort of master it, you can pretty much play anything,
course,
so it's, I'm still at the sort of beginning, I'm still classed as a beginner, but
you can hear, and I think you can feel progress. So with collectors, they can see their collection getting bigger, whether they're collecting engine names or whether they're collecting stamps, and it's similar, isn't it? There's a sense of incremental improvement. Either your collection is getting bigger or your ability is improving. Final question: is it just a giant recorder?
Well, they started off as a recorder, but then developed, so it's much more complicated than a recorder.
With all the little metally bits and valves and stuff like that, and the single reed, not a double reed, but you need a. My dad used to play a bit of clarinet, although he's no longer with us, so I can say this: he wasn't very good. It's 12:41 is the time. Thank you, Carol. That's lovely. Mike's in St Helens. Mike, what would you like to say? No, we may never discover. 6 years ago, I got the urge to be a DJ again, says Mark in Luton. I'm now a resident for one of the top rave brands, working alongside the artists I dance to. Many a night away is absolutely surreal. There's a lot going on here, I have to tell you. I think that you're right. I don't think it's Zach Knight. I think it's Zach Knight, the Fulham player. Poor old Fraser Knight. His name's not anything like Zach or Zat, but do you ever get that? You must get that. Like a real mental stumbling block in your brain. 12:42 is the time. Harvey's in Stanmore. Harvey, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi.
Hello,
Harvey. James. This is really just up my street, this topic of conversation. So I played chess all my life, and I played relatively reasonable standard competitively, and I'd retired. I'd retired before COVID, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? I've retired. Yeah. So the captain of the team I played for said, "Well, why don't you try teaching chess?" So I thought, okay, that sounds like I could have a go at that. And here I am a couple of years on, and I teach chess in schools all over London now, five schools a week.
Gosh.
And it's absolutely fantastic that, I work for, I teach for an organisation, national charity.
Yes.
And they've got schools all over the country.
Don't tell Rishi Sunak, will you? Because he's just announced something similar to this as his great big idea, his latest wizard wheeze. He'd be gutted to find out if you're already at it, Harvey.
Yeah. So I go into schools all over. I teach mainly primary school, but also I've got one secondary school. And I've never taught before, so I thought the thought of actually standing in front of 25 children was really
intimidating.
Really sort of intimidating.
So you teach a class. You're not doing it one-on-one. You're teaching a whole class of kids.
Well, I do teach one-on-one a little bit.
Sure, but also classes. Wow.
Yeah, I teach classes, and it's part of, actually in all of the schools. It's part of the curriculum. So they take an hour out of the week to teach chess, for the children to learn chess, and it gives so many different aspects, so many qualities.
Yes, of course, I know you don't need to tell me, but you might need to tell others. I mean, it's all there, isn't it?
It's all there. Strategic planning, patience. Not to play too quickly. Good manners as well, to learn how to, which doesn't exist actually at tournament level. Sometimes a player will just walk away from the table. Can be very rude. It can be rude.
But at this level, it's sociable. It's a sociable practice, good etiquette, good standards. I love it.
Yeah, and the kids love it, and I love it. It gives me a spring in my step.
I can hear that.
Traveling
Harvey.
all over London. Get my old rail card, my travel card out.
What is the name of the charity? What's the name of the charity if people want to find out more?
It's Chess in Schools and Communities.
Chess in Schools?
Schools and
They didn't spend long
communities.
dreaming that one up, did they, Harvey?
No.
What are we doing, lads?
Didn't.
We're doing Chess in Schools. What are we going to call our charity? Chess in Schools is a good name for our charity. Chess in Schools. And communities. Don't forget communities.
Well, they do. They teach They teach prison. I haven't done one yet, but they actually teach in prisons as well.
Gosh.
So it's part of the. Yes.
Well, I tell you what, I can hear. I mean, obviously, I can't compare it to anything because I don't have a regular record of what your voice would have sounded like if you hadn't done this. But as soon as when you said the words, "It's given me a spring in my step," I thought it's given him a spring in his voice as well. And I mean, everyone is nailing exactly what this research is about. And in fact, with every call, it ceases to be news and becomes close to a statement of the bleeding obvious. Of course, active hobbies, particularly in later life, leave people happier and healthier. How could they not when you hear the enthusiasm being conveyed by callers like Harvey? This is lovely. It doesn't have to be people in later life, of course. It's just a question about the change it's made to your existence and trying to pin down the why of it. But there's something, and I think we're close, aren't we? Because what has playing the clarinet and chess and collections, what have they all got in common? It's a sense of growth, whether it's personal growth. Harvey, in a way, is collecting chess players. Every time he successfully teaches a young child to play chess, he adds another child to his achievement, if you like. And if you're collecting stamps, it's quantity and quality. If you're learning the clarinet, you're getting more tunes, you're getting better. It's a sense of concentration being rewarded with increase, with growth, that has absolutely nothing to do with materialism it's almost as if the means is the end. That's what a hobby is, something that allows you to escape the quotidian and to use focus and concentration and enthusiasm to create something of enormous value that is not remotely material. Sorry, I've gone a bit... I like that actually, but what's the word I'm looking for? Gone a bit. Over the top, that's not the right phrase at all. 12:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 minutes to 1, and something quite exciting has happened, which I think there'll be a clip. So what we've done now, I don't know if you're aware of this, I am now on YouTube. Not live, but they put up a full version. The full version of the show goes up on YouTube every single day. It's partly because, would you believe, that my commentary on American politics has proved very popular in America. So the critiques of Donald Trump and the relatively straightforward explanations of how absolutely awful he is and how perhaps it's been permitted to invade and infect almost every level of American democracy have proved gratifyingly popular with American viewers. So YouTube came to us and inquired about the possibility of putting the whole show up on YouTube. Full disclosures there as well, I'm delighted to say. So you can watch that in glorious Technicolor. But Obviously, when you're dealing at this high level of media, branding is absolutely crucial. So I've got LBCs all over the place, LBCs in the studio, but it meant, I don't know if you remember my enormous mug that featured on almost all of our viral clips at one point, but it's not branded. So they have commissioned a mug for me with full LBC branding that is even bigger than my enormous mug, my original enormous mug, and it has just been delivered to me. And I'm 51 years old. It feels a bit like when I got a ZX Spectrum on Christmas morning. I'm going to have a little sip out of it just to make sure it works as a mug. You have never seen a mug this big. In fact, I suspect that on screen I may look a little bit like the Dennis Waterman character in Little Britain, except the role of the chair is being played by a mug. And I'll just make sure it works. That is a mug. Seriously, that is a mug. It's fantastic. Thank you to Will, my colleague Will, who is, I didn't realise this. I thought he was a sort of podcast and technology wizard. It turns out he's also head of giant mugs here at Global. So congratulations to him. I could almost launch this mug and say something, and all who sail in it. But I think the clip's going, so you can see this. You think I'm exaggerating, don't you? Well, I'm not. Not quite a hobby, but certainly an enthusiasm. I could start collecting giant mugs. Mike's in St Helens. Mike, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Long-time listener. I love the show.
Thank you, mate. Wait till you see the mug.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. Yeah, I'll log in later and take a look at it. My story started as a 10-year-old kid winning a couple of goldfish on a local fair. I'm 54 now, and I own 150 glass aquariums full of tropical fish.
That's a whole house full.
It's a couple of large outbuildings full.
Wow. Gosh.
Yeah. So, it kind of hooked me in the goldfish and turned into a couple of fish tanks. And then when I left school, I got into fish farming and then university. And I was at university at Liverpool. I ended up on a field trip in East Africa on Lake Tanganyika.
Gosh.
And that was about 94, just shortly after the troubles in Rwanda. And was collecting fish for research purposes and kind of got catapulted into that side of things, working in the Great Rift Valley in Africa. So I've probably bagged about 15 countries now that have visited all across Africa.
And
through my love of fish.
And it's your job as well?
It is my job now, yeah. About that 2009, up until that point, I was working in as an IT professional, and I got handed a redundancy notice, and I thought, back into IT, or do I go back to the fish? So I went back to the fish, and I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I mean, that is a big under. So the reason why you've got the two outbuildings is because you trade in these fish as well. That's not just your personal collection.
Yeah, it's a business.
I love that.
But also it's I still spend a lot of time sat plonked in front of fish tanks. The family can't find me; they know where I am.
And it is a bit. Well, someone once told me the reason why we watch telly, sometimes without even noticing what's on, is a throwback to when we'd sit around the campfire after a hard day's hunting. But there is something about watching fish that is just uniquely relaxing, isn't there? There's a I love soothing nature to it all, and I don't know, feeds the imagination. Something rather beautiful just got sent to me. I hope I've got time to read it out because I want to squeeze Robert in Braintree in first. Mike, take care, mate. Thank you for that. Robert, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, the research that you mentioned on it feeds into the hobby I've done. I'm only 24 years old, but for the last 2-3 years before this hobby, I do sailing with my granddad.
Lovely.
And before that, I suffered massively from depression and anxiety. I wouldn't get out of the house at all.
Oh, man.
And I picked up sailing.
Was your granddad already doing it?
Oh, I've been sailing with my granddad since I was 10, but it was only since I decided to take it seriously and have a reason to get out of the house. And I'm now working. I'm at work at the moment, and it's completely changed me. My granddad's probably also listening as well because he's the reason why I listen to LBC.
Oh, what's his name?
Kevin.
All right. Hi, Kevin. Thank you for introducing Robert to us, because it's a pleasure to talk to him. And can you put into words what the relationship was between the sailing bringing you out of yourself and then rediscovering the confidence to get back into the world at large?
To put into words simply, it was proving to myself that I can learn something that is completely foreign and complicated. Ropes and sheets and engines and RPMs, changing diesel filters, all of that. Just knowing that you can function and do those things and learn those things made me far more confident and outgoing.
That's fantastic. And you really did put it into words. That was beautiful. Robert, take care, mate. And thanks again to Kevin. That's amazing, actually. And it tallies with this, which is written by one of my favourite writers, and it's something I haven't seen before. So, in fact, I should thank Tim for sending it in from Brighton. Kurt Vonnegut, if you haven't read Slaughterhouse-Five, or indeed the short story Welcome to the Monkey House, then you really should. When I was 15, I spent a month working on an archaeological dig. I was talking to one of the archaeologists one day during our lunch break, and he asked those kind of getting to know you questions that you ask young people. Do you play sports? What's your favourite subject? I told him, no, I don't play sports. I do theatre. I'm in choir. I play the violin and piano. I used to take art classes. And he went, wow, that's amazing. And I said, oh, no, I'm not any good at any of them. And he said something that I will never forget, and which absolutely blew my mind, because no one had ever said anything like that to me before. He said, I don't think being good at things is the point of doing them. I think you've got all these wonderful experiences with different skills, and that all teaches you things and makes you an interesting person, no matter how well you do at them. And that, honestly, changed my life, because I went from a failure, someone who hadn't been talented enough at anything to excel, to someone who did things because I enjoyed them. And that is a rather beautiful conclusion to an unexpectedly beautiful hour. So thank you to everybody who helped make it so. If you missed any of it, then you can listen back on Global Player, or you can press rewind to listen to live. Well, it's not live radio. You can rewind it when it's live, yeah, and then you press rewind. The minute you press rewind, it's no longer live. So you're not really rewinding live radio. It's taken me a year to work this out. Either way, you can rewind it. And you can also enjoy the whole show podcast. All of LBC's shows are at Global Player, as well as the best video clips, including one of my... Have you seen my new mug?
How could I not?
Just for people who are unfamiliar with diamond, how big is this mug?
I'd say it's twice as big as the hideous monstrosity you used to have.
It's the best. My lovely mug. I'm going to cuddle my mug. And all the video clips are there, including the arrival of my enormous mug in the studio. Rewind Live Radio on Global Player.
No way to talk about
Download for free from your app store, or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.